All right, ladies and gentlemen, am I audible? I will wait until I see in the chat. I hope I have overcome my boomerish problems. Please let me know. Am I live? I'm going to send a tweet saying, I think I'm live. Can you hear me? Anyone? This is not encouraging. So audio and video are both coming through as they should? Amen and hallelujah, if that is the case. Okay, good. So I think we're good to go. I'm so happy that I didn't put you through the usual misery. And I want to apologize to Jonathan Pohl, Dr. Pohl. I am I am sorry that this is happening at the same time as your poll position this evening. That certainly was not intentional. Not King David in the house, adherent of Lady Columbia. Cassius, I'm happy to see you here, sir. Hopefully this will be entertaining for you, or informative. Carpathian, a few folks are here. All right, I'm going to give people a couple of minutes to come in. Let me send this tweet that says I am live, so people will know. So yes, while we're waiting for a few minutes, what have I been doing? I have these two Circassian saddles. And, oh, hi, Philosophicat. Hello, and hello to Water Lily. I have these two Circassian saddles, as I've been saying to everyone. I'm just going to talk for a couple minutes to allow a few more people to come in. So I'm just talking about what I've been up to, which is dealing with the fact that one of these antique saddles has some of these damn wood-boring beetle holes in it. So I have been attempting to vivify the leather with all sorts of treatments and solutions. I've been polishing the silver mounts on them. I've been treating the exposed wood with permethrin, restoration, renovation, this sort of thing. And I am very happy that we have a mod in the house. At a minimum, it looks like we have Philosophicat, who's got a mighty wrench, beware all. Water Penny in the house. Prism, excellent. So we've got some people. I'm going to start here in just moments. What else do I have to say as a little teaser to fill this time? Other than welcome to the channel, for those who wish to support it, you can do so on Subscribestar and on GoFundMe. There's also Minds, there's Gab, there is Twitter. Yeah, there's something else I'm forgetting, but that's all right. Yes, what else do I have to say? I'm going to be asking Tim if he wishes to discuss the Virginia exit, counties leaving to go to West Virginia, and what sort of implications that might have, or whether it's all just a big bunch of circus nonsense. And there was another one I wanted to ask him about. It was actually quite interesting. Damn it, it escapes me at the moment, but I have it written down, so hopefully it will occur. Yes. So I think that is it, other than asking a couple answering a couple questions, and then I will get started. On the saddles, Water Lily 2017 asks how old my Circassian saddles are. As is usually the case with tack and harness that comes from the Islamic world or the Caucasus or the Middle East, elements of the mounts get changed over time because leather wears out, wooden saddle trees wear out. It's the same thing you find with scabbards and harnesses. They'll reuse some elements, and so, you know, the leather coverings, I don't know. The oldest elements on any one of the given saddles, I don't know, but roughly one of them is post expulsion of the Circassians from the Caucasus, because it's made by Circassians in Turkey. The yellow and silver work isn't quite as good. I'm guessing it's probably sometime before World War I, probably the last 10 years of the 19th century or the first 10 years of the 20th. The other one has beautiful old silver work that was put onto it, probably taken off a previous saddle, and it is dated 1919 and has some Cyrillic inscriptions. So it's right there from the period of the, I guess, the late end of World War I and the First World War in the Caucasus. So yes, I don't know, 100, 100 or so years old each. All right, so I have been talking, you have been patient, I thank you for it. I'm going to start out with this discussion that I am calling the limits of universalism. You guys will be aware that I generally don't look at the chat while I'm going through the presentation sort of side of things because I'm so prone to become lost in my own thoughts. So bear with me. I will come back to the chat after I present all of this material. And I will do an Ask Me Anything for as long as the interest seems to be there in the audience. So, tonight we'll be talking about the limits of universalism and the problems presented by universalism itself, I think. All of this really came to be as a result of my interaction in the comments section of a video on someone else's channel, not on mine. I was interacting in the comments with a well-known figure on the dissident right, and I took exception to his framing of things as ethnat versus civnat, or if you prefer, framing it as though it's all about genetic relationship, relative consanguinity in the people of a nation versus beliefs or propositions. And to me, that seems to be quite a false dichotomy, which in turn yields a sort of endless hamster tube that you can wander down of dialectical nonsense. And despite my best efforts, he seemed to be unable to understand what it was I was saying. That's how it came across to me. He suggested, after I had sort of, fired off a series of comments, he suggested that I was just really looking for new names for the same old things, and those things were being called what they were being called, so it was easiest to just call them that, and that rather than, doing all that, I might, focus on, more important things, that the entire argument was, an autistic waste of time. And so here I am tonight to make the case more completely. So false dichotomies. How do I start? Think about, for example, general relativity and quantum mechanics. Now, I'm no physicist, so there have probably been all sorts of developments that call some of the basic things I say into question. I don't want to get off in the weeds with it. I just want to illustrate a point. So for those of you who have a better understanding of physics than I do, and that's certainly not hard to do, bear with me. I bring these two things up, general relativity and quantum mechanics, because I want to illustrate a point. These two things are simultaneously true, and yet they can't be brought together in I guess what was called a grand unified theory, or at present that has not been done conclusively. And whether it needs to be done is a question that I'm not even qualified to address. I just bring these two things up because I want to illustrate how two important models that have been developed over time for how things happen in the universe, they don't seem to fit together, and yet both of them are true, and therefore both of them are necessary to our understanding of physics and the universe around us, until something better comes along. So we got two things that are simultaneously true, and from that perspective, it would seem, at least it seems immediately obvious to me, that to argue in some sense that's exclusive over which one is true, the one at the expense of the other, seems to be a fool's errand. And that's kind of what I'm going to be getting into tonight, when a false dichotomy is presented, and then the tension inherent in that falsehood becomes the basis, the driving force behind just mountains of nonsense, mountains of wasted breath. And I hope to illustrate, in addition to that, why it's important that we not fall for such things, because of what a waste of time they are, because of how counterproductive they are, and importantly because of how they can trap us. I often talk about this, so people who've followed the channel for some time will be familiar with it, but it's me bringing up the Fenris wolf. Fenrir was bound with a number of things that don't exist. The beard of a woman, the sinews/nerves of a bear, and it's only when you understand that sinews and nerves were designated by the same word with the Old Norse that you understand why that's important, because a bear was thought not to feel pain, you know, like berserker. What other? The sound of a cat's footfall, the roots of a mountain, things, the spittle of a bird, things that you're not going to come across. But those are precisely what bound the most wild creature of old night, as I so often say. Which means these words have power, and that they can bind, and they bind by framing the terms of the argument, and thereby preventing us from thinking in certain ways while encouraging us to think in other ways. So that's what this is all about this evening. Please do bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. Where was I? I was with general relativity and quantum mechanics. They're simultaneously true. It's stupid. It's idiotic, arguably, to be, contesting which one of them is true. Likewise, taking people on an individual basis and looking at statistical probability. Both are models for understanding with whom you're dealing. You can take someone on an individual basis, and it is important that you do so. It's also important that you have recourse to what you know generally about a certain type of person and the statistical probability that comes with that. Both are simultaneously true, or at least you can say to whatever extent any one of them is true, the other one can be. Even though the two systems, like with general relativity and quantum mechanics, they have yet to be reconciled in some grand unified theory or whatever. So statistically, Americans who are black are more likely to be murderers than Americans who are Asians. This, of course, doesn't mean that my black neighbor is a murderer, and of course I should form my opinion of my black neighbor based on individual experience of his or her behavior, of his or her beliefs and character. But if I meet a black guy at the gas station at midnight when I'm pumping gas, statistics are a useful guide in the absence of any more specific information. These parallel tracks of making prospective behavioral determinations in human society are just that. They're parallel tracks. There's no need to attempt to apply rules for generalities to the particulars, nor should we be applying the rules for particulars to the generalities. There's no way to reduce these parallel tracks further into some single, hopelessly naive utopian ideal. They tell us we have to judge everyone individually. Otherwise, we're racist or classist or ageist or homophobic or whatever. But the reality is we need both approaches. So what I want to get across here is that I think, anyway, that a kind of universalism is the issue. Or let me try to say it another way. Universalism applied to a hopelessly false dichotomy is the basis for dialectical manipulation. Look at the example of whether or not society should be dominated by men or dominated by women. This is a false dichotomy. Each sex has its roles, it has its proper domains. The idea of dominance on the part of one or the other is utter foolishness. But it drives an entire global machine of misunderstanding. The false dichotomy is women versus men. Then we apply universalism to this central misunderstanding, to this central false dichotomy, the idea that it should be the one versus the other. And presto, the entire exercise of talking about it is like a dog chained to a post running in circles. It's one of my favorite metaphors. The dog runs first one way and then the other, describing a perfect circle in the dust, blind to the fact that what pins him to the ground, what secures his chain, is failure to recognize the simple fact that both men and women are important, rather than either men or women. This is one of the primary ways that the perfect becomes the enemy of the good. Universalism applied to a false dichotomy. I really want to emphasize this. It's a source of tremendous energy. The falsely polarized elements have a kind of magnetism, a desire to return to the whole, a tension inherent in the suspension of the unity, in the false splitting of the unity through clever rhetoric. But the terms of the dialectic itself make resolution and synthesis almost impossible. Flipping the magnets, flipping them over, so that instead of snapping together, they repel each other and endlessly switch their positions. I'm sure you've had that experience as a kid. I certainly did with magnets, watching them go snap. Wow, that's where they wanted to be. Rotate them around, confusing the real issues, and you find that no matter what you try to do, they just won't go together. So I'm going to give you some examples of this. The primary one I'm going to give you is this business of civic versus ethnic. And months ago, God, probably more than a year ago now, I did a clip called Civic versus Ethnic, and some of that is covered here. But this is all by way of response to that dissident right figure who glossed what I was trying to get across as being merely autism that's a waste of time. So we've got civic versus ethnic. I hold that this is a false distinction, that it's a false dichotomy. The question isn't civic versus ethnic, or propositional versus genetic, as we talked about at the outset. It's rather a conflict between those who believe that whites should be able to maintain ethnic majorities and those who believe whites alone should be prevented from maintaining ethnic majorities. From this perspective, the form of government has nothing to do with it. It's not whether we should have ethno-nationalism versus civic nationalism. It's whether whites should continue to behave as though they're uniquely devoid of any claim to collective identity or collective interest, and likewise uniquely obligated to not only accept but actively work towards their own disappearance. What's glossed as civic nationalism is simply a development of a very old Western idea, the idea of the consent of the governed, as distinct from the idea of imposed subjection carried forward. This idea of consent of the governed carried forward into an emphasis on agreement to the terms of the civil contract. If we think of CivNat as somehow diametrically opposed to ethnic nationalism, we frame things as though the only thing that's important is relative consanguinity. And what's to be opposed is the idea of voluntary agreement to the form of government. But of course that has almost nothing to do with the issues we're actually facing, which at their heart have more to do with immigration policy than they do with the form of government chosen. Why muddy the water with the false notion that we're talking about forms of nationalism when we can more precisely identify the issues and the elements that are actually out there scattered across the table? In my view, the discussion should be moving towards talking about the idea of majority rule, and the way this core idea has been subverted through, almost a century of focus on the rights of minorities. When it suits their end, and it suits their aims, the forces of progress support majority rule. When it doesn't, they forbid it, dispensing with the democratic element. It's not one form of state versus another. It's state versus process. Because the alternative to the nation state is never another state. It's always a receding utopian horizon. But the CivNat versus ethnat assumption sits there like settled business, keeping us from properly considering what's actually going on. I think that sucks. Shitty maps that don't match the territory are often worse than no maps at all. This business of what's actually on offer, what's actually out there as the alternatives that are being presented, that, I think, is what actually matters. Because we're all, if you'll allow the expression, jerking off to the CivNat versus ethnat porn, we're missing the real issues. To take one example, we should be talking about the biggest problem with the propositional aspect of our covenants, which I've brought up many times before. I've probably bored many of you with this. But that's the idea that we have no way to empirically test belief. The people who emigrate to so-called civic nationalist nations do not have their beliefs tested in any way. And there's no basis for us to assume that any admitted to our country based on putative acceptance of a national tradition will in fact cleave to the foundational beliefs in question. We not only do not test them at present, it's possible that we will not be able to test them, whether we wish to or not. This, I think, is a subject that matters. For all that I've seen nobody other than myself talking about it. And as I've said, we take the focus off the idea that the members of a nation have to agree on their form of government. With one government and many people, there's no way around the fact that everyone will have to endorse the national covenant to a greater or lesser extent. My aim here is to underscore the fact that how we frame our discussions, what elements we admit to consideration, and how we admit them to consideration, all of that can clarify and remove obstacles to thought. Or it can obscure, befuddle, misdirect, and otherwise introduce barriers to productive thought, which is almost always the only available foundation for productive action. That being, again, productive thought. We need it for productive action in furtherance of the changes that we want to see occur. Now, I'd like to take a second example, but I've got a cat that I've got to get out of here in order to do that. I'm going to take up the example of liberalism versus illiberalism to illustrate this further. But first, I'm going to have to get this whining creature out of here. I don't even know how to control the features of my stream, so I'm just going to get it and get rid of it. Come here, you little fucker. Come here. You gotta go or you're going to be loud. Beat it. Spoiled felines. Alright. Let me see where I was here. It's liberalism versus illiberalism. Yes. Okay, hopefully I'm still coming through clearly. Let me check this in the comments here. I'm totally thrown off my game by having to deal with the cat, which I did not hear had burrowed up under a blanket and was hanging out down here, and I did not know that that was the case. So anyway, my apologies. Ugh, cats. All right. Zed says he's got pants. I'm wearing sweatpants because I'm an old man. I am soon going to be going with the old black grandpa tracksuit, the Adidas tracksuit. Oh, man, I am going to be throwing down. All right, so we've got this idea of liberalism versus illiberalism. Another example I want to show of what I see as being a false dialectic premised upon a equally false, foundationally false dichotomy. So, liberalism versus illiberalism. This is something that you'll hear about a lot, especially if you follow Morgoth's channel, which I like, which I recommend. As I've mentioned before, I don't understand why, but I just can't help liking him. I think it's the accent. If I'd been beaten up by a Geordie as a kid, maybe I'd hate him, but I'm just fascinated by that accent. It's amazing. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point is that on his channel, he goes into this business of, sort of the liberal, atomized individualism versus the illiberalism, which, recently he was talking about reflected in Spengler's thought as, Prussian socialism or a kind of Prussian collectivism. All of this, in my view, is just another application of universalism to what is at root, I think, a false dichotomy. And so it leads to all sorts of dialectical back and forth bullshit, guaranteed to bring the bearings on the hamster wheel of public discourse to white heat. The usual way that this is presented goes that we have to get rid of liberalism because it led to all of this. We have to crack down because it's all gone too far. And while I agree that there are problems out there and there are problems that have to be addressed, I think all of this is framed in a hopelessly muddled way as a starting point. So think about civil law versus martial law. And other people have heard me talk about this, and I've got to go into this a bit and talk about it again. And I think it bears talking about again because it's so important in order to illustrate why I think that the liberalism versus illiberalism argument is a false dichotomy, a false dialectic, and an autistic waste of time. We have civil law and we have martial law, and they are two parallel systems of government. They run side by side. more or less independent. Now, there are places where they overlap, like in the United States, the Uniform Code of Military Justice is based upon our civil law, although it's more conservative in terms of changing with the times than our civilian law, and that's for good reason. It's by design, not by accident, even if we today seldom remember why that's the case. We have these two forms of government. In the United States, you have the UCMJ, which again is a reflection of our civilian law, and then you have the idea of true crisis response, which is the imposition of martial law. And that's the point where you suspend habeas corpus, and your rights are fundamentally suspended for the duration of the crisis. So we've got these gradings. We've got civil law based on English common law, and that's what governs the world, particularly of contracts, and exchange transactions, the world of business, commerce. There's also criminal law as well. Much of this is reflected over in the world of military law in the UCMJ, which, as I said, is based upon it, but it goes back to some older systems that have to do with standing armies and how they're governed while they exist. I think in Britain they have what's called the Army Act, which has been pushed forward over time. They used to have different ones for different branches of service. And that has changed over time, but you can see there are gradations from the common law, civil law area over into military law, which is a reflection of it, over into the full crisis response, which is the suspension of habeas corpus and full, martial law proper. And as I said, all of this comes with institutionalizing a standard army. Now, for some of you, this may sound a little bit crazy. What the hell is he talking about? Well, you have to think about human societies over time. There are forms of government that do not distinguish in any way between the military footing and the civil footing. They are one and the same. The feudal system is arguably this. The way everything is set forth is so that the nobles can occupy their territory and use it to fund what they need to maintain a certain number of troops. You've got your pikemen and similar rabble. You might have your archers that you've got to cut down all the yew trees in order to supply. You may, for example, have your cavalry and the expense of producing armor and weapons and maintaining the horses. You've got the issue of supplying a certain amount of supplies to any army that gets called up, when you're tapped by the sovereign. You've got the idea, for example, of the Mongols, where their banner organization was their state organization. The military organization is the civil organization. And yet we're over here with this other way of approaching it. And I hear no one talking about it. And that is the idea of civil and martial law. We keep martial law over here for the break glass in case of fire situations. And otherwise, we have civil law. And I think we have to think about this because it's created a kind of schizophrenia in us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me finish with laying out the basics of this. Back in the old days when there was a crisis, you would have the Roman office of dictator, and that would supplant the typical arrangement of the two consuls and the rest of the Roman government that had been elected by a limited body, but nevertheless elected. You have the idea of martial law, as we discussed. When there's a crisis, things need to change. The tolerance goes away. You have no more special snowflakes. Everybody wears the same uniform. There's strict hierarchy. If you don't obey orders, you can be shot. You can have drumhead court-martials, right? Officers on the battlefield can make determinations depending on how critical the situation is, and you don't even have to go to a court-martial. So I bring this up because people are talking about liberalism versus illiberalism, as though they need to change our form of government to make it less liberal in order to deal with the crisis that we're facing. But we've got two systems of fucking government. And when's the last time you heard McDonald or Jared Taylor or Morgoth or Mark Collett or Greg Johnson or anyone discuss this bald fact? I mean, if we're going to raise an existing piece of our cultural technology that appears to be a uniquely Western innovation, shouldn't we at least like know how the structure was set up and how the parts articulate, what they're there for, how they work? You see, from my perspective, you think about, wow, things are really bad, things are happening, we've got too much tolerance, we've got this multiculturalism going on, we seem to be, sort of under siege in a number of respects, and that means that we need to move over into this other system to be less liberal and less tolerant in order to deal with the issue. And so it's framed based on a false dichotomy on this idea of liberal versus illiberal and how we're going to have to make a choice regarding these things, when in fact our goddamn system is built with both of these elements. So the issue is not at least necessarily whether we should be agitating for some different form of government. It seems to me to have much more to do with how we define warfare, how we define crisis, how we detect it, how we raise the alarm that causes or triggers our period of crisis response collectivization. And then at the end of that, based on our old model, you would then go back to civil law, martial law would be suspended, and you would go back to life as usual. But as I pointed out in a previous clip of mine, warfare itself has changed. We have this whole business that I feel is muddled. It's a mess. I don't think we need to change, our form of government in order to deal with this. So the issue isn't, I assert, whether we should have a liberal or an illiberal society. The issue is that we've forgotten we have two systems for a reason, and that we're dealing with new forms of warfare that are designed not to trigger our crisis response. The wires, as I just mentioned, I said elsewhere, it was it was in the last Message to the West clip. The wires have been cut. We think of illiberalism as a response to multiculturalism, when in fact what we're dancing around, what many, but not all, many are failing to see, is that we're in a constant state of war. It's just that the definition of war has changed. So from that perspective, what we're in need of is not illiberalism, but what we need is to revise our definition of war and to revise our definition of mobilization. Because what's happening is the triggering of our crisis response that kicks off collectivization is being held in abeyance because of the tempo of the war that's been undertaken against us and the fact that it's non-kinetic. So let me maybe come at this from a different direction because I really want to get this point across. Look at how multiculturalism itself demands limitations to our speech and how it demands our disarmament. Wherever you see multiculturalism, the first thing that you see is the removal of freedom of speech. And that's for a reason. You cannot have freedom of speech in a multicultural environment. It is not possible. Likewise, in the USA at least, though, they don't want you to have anything sharper than a spoon in your possession in Britain, so you see the same thing carried through. But in the United States, we see that there's an attack on the Second Amendment as well. You cannot have a First and a Second Amendment. You cannot have guns and free speech in a multicultural society. Now, I've discussed that in a previous clip. It's called, Multiculturalism Demands Hate Speech. And you can go back and check that out. It's somewhere back down along the line in the clips archived on the channel. Think about this. If you've got, let's say we're in Hamtramck, right? And we've got this crazy situation where Muslims have moved in and pushed out the Poles, and a lot of these people are hanging out at the mosques, and they think that pork is a vile thing, and it's disgusting, and the food should be halal, and dogs should not be living in houses, and women should be covered. How do you speak freely around those people? If you've got a cultural basis that recognizes this sort of old idea of turn the other cheek, or the idea of conversion among the Christians, right, which should be based upon an attempt to convince and to get someone based on their own conscience to change what they do and how they do it. When you have that as a foundation that at least everybody shares, whether it has moved into some sort of, post-religious secular adaptation or whatever, doesn't matter, or if it's a living Christian ideal in the heart of a believer, it's still sort of there as a basis for everyone. But if your holy books say enslave and kill the unbeliever, well, what do you do then? Because if I express through my free speech my First Amendment right, only recognized by the government, natural to me, native to me, as a man born into existence, if I exercise that right to say that Islam is a fill in the blank that's negative, and I don't know, the henna-painted beard mufti next door decides he doesn't like that, and his sacred script says kill the unbeliever, and he has an AK-47 that he just bought at the gun show, then we've got real problems. You know, there's social friction. There's the possibility of disharmony. So we've got here is multiculturalism. And it's not a question of whether we should be liberal or illiberal. It's the idea of framing this in such a way that we can really get at what the issues are that are involved. Multiculturalism demands hate speech laws. Oh, man, I tell you what, these cats, especially the little obnoxious female ones, the mouthy Siamese ones. This cat is just destroying my train of thought. Anyway, I gotta be careful how I talk or it's gonna turn into a cheeseburger moment. Okay, so multiculturalism is, in fact, a kind of attack upon our rights. It's the imposition of a state of affairs that destroys our existing national covenant. By introducing multiculturalism, it's driving a stake through the heart of the First and Second Amendment. It has to. There is no way around it. It's designed to do that, because you cannot have a multicultural system where everyone speaks their mind and does what they want. This fucking cat. You cannot have a multicultural system where everyone speaks their mind and does what they want to, and they're armed when they don't agree on these fundamental things. So it's the imposition of a state of affairs that destroys our existing national covenant. It's an attack on the integrity of the nation and on the integrity of the reflection of the nation, which is the state. It's an act of war. It's just a slow-moving form of unrestricted warfare that's not limited to kinetic actions. It's one that, in fact, more patiently sidesteps the activities we think of as being acts of war, for all that it does remain a deadly threat. And yet here we are discursively excuse me, discursively jerking off, again, about whether we should have a liberal or an illiberal society, when in fact we've long had both forms available to us simultaneously. And yet again, we're putting our worst foot forward. What everyone claims to want to deal with is the great replacement. And yet what they're doing is talking about other things, about how we have to be illiberal and how the majority doesn't have to agree with our ideas. That's a recipe for failure. And so I have to wonder whether those who do not or will not recognize the importance of all the things I've been talking about, I have to wonder whether they're actually interested in victory. Ask yourselves this: why is there an enormous pushback on even uttering the term Great Replacement? Why is there all kinds of hysterical reaction to just the statement, it's okay to be white? And on the other hand, there's all sorts of support for introducing the idea of ethno-nationalism versus civic nationalism into discourse. It's all over the joint. It's because the latter can be tolerated, because it amplifies the existing false dichotomy and the associated tail-chasing, rhetorical dialectics. But the former, discussions of things like the fact that it is okay to be white, or discussing the Great Replacement, these things put the emphasis squarely on the problem. And that's the first thing that everyone needs to notice, recognize, contextualize, and accept if we want to be effective in any way. And I say notice, recognize, contextualize, and accept because it's part of a system I have developed for spreading ideas that I used to apply in marketing, advertising, branding, and all the rest, so they are technical terms. But we have to understand the most important things first and get everyone on board. Arguing about illiberalism, it's like, yeah, hey, listen, I want to share this great idea. Have you heard the good news, brother? I got this great idea. You're not going to be allowed to do what you want to do. Oh, okay, that sounds great. I think that's wonderful. Tell me more. And then the next shot out of the box is all about this idea of ethnat versus civnat, and civnat's propositional, and that's based on the idea that we all have to agree. And they're like, no, we don't all have to agree. What's most important is that we're all the same race, or the same, cluster of relatively closely related ethnic groups. You see how the important issues that are going to be critical to turning all this mess around are obscured by one approach. They're made harder to see. You find yourself trapped, like the dog that I referred to earlier in the discussion, chained to that position. Anyway, yeah, the dog. And the thing that chains the dog, that pins it to the ground, and the length of chain, and the yapping first one way or another. You see it in a yard. Anyone who has a dog, you've seen it before. It's a perfect circle on the ground. It's the most beautiful metaphor. The thing that pins the people to the ground is their lack of understanding of the unity of the two things that they feel they have to run first one way and then the other about. Out at the rim of the wheel, at the rim of the circle, it seems that everything is far apart and you have to go first one way and then the other, and they talk about horseshoes and inverting and reversing it, and you find out that the one sort of somehow transforms itself into the other through a process that seems almost arcane. And yet when you reduce the circumference of the circle, reduce its width, you end up, so I should say radius, you end up with this point in the center where these two things that seem to be separate in fact come together. And that's what pins us down, the lack of awareness of where we're pinned to the ground, the way in which the terms have been set, which I see as the length of the chain. So to wrap this up, before we move over into Ask Me Anything territory, and I can jump over to the comments and have a look at them, I want to close with a quote that bears on this Chinese concept, this ancient Chinese concept I've been looking into, which is called the rectification of names. And it's quite an interesting thing. But I think I'll have to just quote this bit of a passage and explain it. Hopefully it will speak for itself in reference to all of this that we have just covered. And this is a passage in the Zuo Zhuang. And that's the commentary of Zuo, which is apparently an ancient Chinese narrative history that was probably complete somewhere in the neighborhood of the Warring States period. So I'm guessing that's somewhere around 300 BC. So this is an old little bit of text, and it reads, "In criticizing the giving of an unusual name, a Jin official formulated a version of the rectification of names. Quote, by names one fixes duties. By duties one produces rituals. By rituals one gives form to government. And by government one corrects the people." So if you simply engage in a bit of substitution here by using almost synonymous or arguably synonymous terms, the entire breadth of the approach becomes quite clear, and we can relate it to everything that I've talked about thus far. And you can think of this as being my response to the accusation of being a time-wasting autist for paying careful attention to the terms that are used, to the ways in which the argument is framed. By names, one fixes responsibilities. By responsibilities, one produces social relationships, hierarchy, and behavioral patterns. Through this, in turn, one gives form to normative regulation and integration of behavior. And in so doing, one corrects the people. Puts one in mind of the old saying about how knowing a demon's name gives one power over it. But take it a step forward. It suggests that one has even more power over a demon if one is responsible for naming it in the first place. Think about those who are willing to take the argument as given to them, who run backwards and forwards on their short tether like a dog about a post. Think about those who accept the names that are given to them, like reactionaries. The term being reactionary itself, you understand me, as an old term of abuse created by Jacobins and later employed by Marxists to abuse those who sought to thwart the march of progress. Those people are not in control of their own story, of their own thoughts, of their own ideas, of their own message. They're doomed always already, to use that Derridian expression I so love, they're always already doomed. There's nothing there for them. And so this is my response to the accusation of being an autist, wasting people's time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. And now I will take a look through here to see if I can pull forth the comments section. Let me see if I can find this here. And I'm going to go back through this. The usual rules apply, ladies and gentlemen. If you want me to answer questions, and I've got a fair amount of time to do that tonight, so hopefully there'll be some good questions and interesting people asking things. If you want me to see the questions, please do put the little @Semiagog thing on there so it will be highlighted for me and I'll see it, because otherwise there's too much for me to scroll through to figure out. And while you guys are getting yourselves set here to ask some questions, I'm going to pour myself a little Saturday evening beverage right now. If I can keep from making a mess. Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be right back with you in a mere moment. It just takes a while to pour this right. Yes, so, good questions, good ideas, interesting thoughts. Come up with good questions to ask me to make this entertaining, and thereby make this delicious beer taste that much more delicious. Nice. Okay, so I'm starting way back at the back to see if there are any questions that are interesting here. Adherent of Lady Columbia is saying, Semiagog, been watching videos on the hog problem you have down south, how bad it is in your state. In Texas, the hordes are usually 40 plus. Well, yeah, and I've got myself a good little brush gun, lever action 44. I need to get me some of that that FLIR vision technology, and I think you can hunt hog year round. That would be exciting. All right. Zedez, I see her appearing. Welcome. Again, folks, I'm just going back through this. Bear with me. It's going to take some time for me to catch up to the current moment, but I want to make sure I get questions that I might have missed along the way. Sherry K says, Semiagog is a great channel. Thank you very much. John Goris in the house. I'm still thinking about animation projects and ideas to share with him. I feel that his talent must be unleashed. Not to say that he cannot do it himself, but I give that some thought occasionally. Mounted Patrolman says, Commando Oliver. Oh, yes, the sweater. I inherited 2 of those from my father. So, yeah, I wear them from time to time. Mounted Patrolman says, Semiagog, are you wearing underwear? Yes, I'm wearing underwear, and I'm wearing sweatpants. I'm not entirely sure I even want to know what that's about, because a mounted patrolman asking me whether or not I'm wearing underwear immediately brings to mind all kinds of like village people scenarios and assless chaps and things that create a strong sense of discomfort on my part. So, what else do we have here? People saying hello. Looks like you guys are just chatting in the background. Again, bear with me. I'm going to catch up here. Adam Scott says, Semiagog, why haven't we got our own Bible to guide us? I mean, Bibles are out there aplenty. If it's a Bible you're looking for, As I recall, there's even a group of people who makes them available for free in the little bedside drawers in hotel rooms. Okay. Philosophic Cat says, press 1 if you want the cat back. That cat, it's entertaining, but it's constantly, if I don't watch it, it will dig its claws into one of my Turkish rugs down here, and I just don't want it torn up. It's my housemate's cat, not mine, so I tolerate it at intervals. All right. Okay, people are saying audio sounds good. It's all way, 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 way back there. Okay. Oh, said this. It's a white cat, no less. No, it's a seal point, I think they call it. So it's more like a cappuccino or a tiramisu or something. It's all over the place. All right. Luckily, your cat can't open doors. I wouldn't be surprised if it does. All right, I'm going through, still looking for questions. Bear with me. I will get to the ones that are the latest. Hopefully there will be a group of them there that are interesting that I can go off at some length and run my mouth about. Okay. Helen's Rule, Mycenaean's Drool says, Semigog's brain is so big that I often have to listen to him twice. I'm sorry to do that to you, man. I've listened to myself more than once on occasion, and it's not pleasant. Okay. Said Des, that's exactly what is not being considered. Thank you for the well-framed language, Semigog. I'm not sure what she was referring to there, but thank you, Miss Z. All right. Oh, Fiend J is in the house. Hello there. All right. Cassius is still around. What did he have to say? That feeling when no First Amendment. Yes. All right, I'm scrolling down through here, peoples. We've got a fair amount of time tonight, so I won't run away immediately. I'll be able to put up with all kinds of bullshit and crap, shit posting, everything. We are on tonight. I've poured myself a beer. The only thing that will mark the limits of this journey we're going to take together will be my need to smoke. Okay. I will not go and get the kitty, Sabrina C1. It has been banished. All right. Questions? Good gracious. I can scroll faster. There's a lot of text, and none of it is marked as a question. All right, King Salmon Fish says, hello, Ollie, just got here, the power of a name. Yes, indeed. Oh shit, now I lost my point. See, you start scrolling down and it does this auto refresh thing. Okay, yeah, so King Salmon Fish, hello, I found my way. Adherent of Lady, it looks like we've arrived, folks. My apologies. Adherent of Lady Columbia Semigog, I think, or says, Semigog, I think the topic of assimilation should be discussed by you and Tim, and the tools for proper installation for legal but culturally isolated citizens. This for after changing I'm immigration. I think something happened with your autocomplete of your text there, so I cannot address it. Semigog, would you privatize the military and police? No, I am not inclined to do that. Now, I'm not familiar with all the fancy, ANCAP arguments for how that would happen, or minarchists and the rest. No, because I'm increasingly beginning to think that the secret to sort of restoring the health, at least of the United States, is becoming conscious of these parallel structures of the military and civilian worlds and requiring the participation of all citizens, or at least all male citizens, in the military. Or basically anyone who wants to vote is going to have to do military service. And that all, I haven't gotten to the heart of it yet, but I'm increasingly thinking about that as a key way forward. And what you end up with there is the atomized or libertarian or individualistic side of things being the civil law, and the military side of things being sort of the baseline sense of cooperation and collective identity, or the mechanism that would instill that. And so I think you need the one and the other together. And actually, this is something that I was kind of tapping on earlier in the discussion when I said I was getting ahead of myself, and I talked about this idea of a kind of schizophrenia where we have the civilian side and the military side. So look at the United States. You have the civilian side of things where, as Tim is so constantly or so often saying, we can only rest at night because, hard men stay up through the night to keep us safe. And there is certainly truth to that. You know, if you had to look at what cops actually do have to deal with, I'm not saying that they're all great and wonderful, but lots of them, the majority, if I'm to take Tim at his word, and he has experience of them, so I believe him, and from what I've seen, it's the case, the majority of cops actually do want to get bad guys and help people. So, you know, they serve a function. Likewise, the military. And yet we're allowed to live in this isolated, separate world with this false distinction, with the disappearance of the draft, which I think is a part of this story. And you can even see it even more so with Europe, where they don't have to keep a standing army of their own, but under our umbrella, they can pour that money into, you know, bringing immigrants in, or, you know, social welfare programs or whatever it is, without having to pay to defend themselves. And so it creates a kind of artificial la-la land that has nothing to do with reality. So I haven't thought my way through all of this yet, but I think a key to being overwhelmed by those who are in favor of, you know, ugly, itchy black wool uniforms like the Oswald Mosley crowd. You know, I like Morgoth, I like Laura Towler, and I think Mosley is a great, you know, meme figure, but I am not a fan of National Socialism in the slightest. And so I think in order to avoid that, we're going to have to keep our collectivist element, but I don't think that we need to dispense with liberalism. I think what we need to do is bring back online the collectivist aspect that goes with the military, with compulsory service. And I think ultimately, to answer the Martin Webb question here, privatizing the military and or the police, both, whatever, would get in the way of that collective aspect, which needs to be reinforced if we're going to survive. Zdes says, are those pockets? And if so, to hold what? I don't... Oh, you're referring to these? These are little epaulettes, if that's what you're talking about. This was originally a military issue shirt, British, as I recall. If I'm wrong, somebody remind me. I had always heard, you know, in the back of the old Soldiers of Fortune magazine, that it was the you know, the British commando sweater, jumper, whatever the fuck you people call it. Alligator clip versus crocodile clip, wrench versus spanner. Okay. Cassius, Semigog, what do those 3 doors lead to? What's behind door number 3? You know, nothing interesting, but the fact that anyone wants to know makes me not want to tell you. So what do we have? Justin Lee, what are your thoughts on the price of beer in China? I don't know what beer costs in China, and so I am ill-equipped to render any sort of comment on that subject. Marc-Andre Otis asks, Semiagog, how can we explain to the European Union the necessity of protecting the Europeans? It's hopeless, because they're explicitly aware that they're not protecting them, that they're in fact destroying them, and it is, in my belief, in my view, something that they're fully aware of. They know that they are, that they're tearing it all apart, and they don't care. So it's the, this is where what's-his-name steps in. God, I love him. Lester Maddox, with his remark when people were complaining about the circumstances in prisons, he said, well, you're going to keep having that problem until you get a better class of people in there. You're going to keep having that problem with the leadership of the European Union until you get a better class of people in there. All right. Zedez. Mark me, but just a smiley face. Okay. Semigok, what do you reckon could swim faster, a chicken or a pigeon? I have no idea. I'm not even sure I want to think too hard about why that question appeared or what it could really mean. King Salmonfish, Semiagog, what do you think the likelihood of China collapsing is? Well, I don't know what it is, but thus far I could say that it seems to be increasing daily. And you know what, as I go through these, I'm going to like call out people who have channels that I dig. Zedez works often with JF Gariapi, and I've been a Gariapi. I've been a guest on his channel a number of times. I can recommend him. Cassius is just awesome for just no bullshit. In point of fact, I have very little idea of what Cassius's personal opinions are about anything, because all he does is deliver the closest thing he can manage to direct translations or objective reviews of, for example, election campaigns and things that are going on in places like Europe. So you get it colorless and clear without any kind of tincture added to it. He just gives you information. I'm sure there are areas that he covers that I don't know enough about and therefore can't identify some implicit bias he has. But generally speaking, his content is great for people who want to track what's going on in the EU with various elections. He translates a lot of content that otherwise wouldn't be available in English, so I can very heartily recommend his channel. Philosophicat is another one. She's been getting into things like Evola quite a bit for some time here, as well as gender roles and things like that. But I definitely recommend her channel. She's got all sorts of interesting things she considers, and there certainly aren't enough female voices in the movement. By the way, I'm going to take this opportunity to abuse her a bit because we're supposed to do a discussion of jargon in use among the dissident right. Or on the dissident right, and we have not yet been able to schedule that, so hopefully it will happen soon. All right, as I come across other people with channels that I know, I will give them a shout out. Dawn Browning says, Semiagog, we're not supposed to understand how we are dominated. Well, yes. Yes, that is the way the game is supposed to be played. Salmonfish, King Salmonfish says, Semiagog, what do you think about the left recently claiming diversity is blackface, corporate and political blackface? I don't know. I don't know what the context is for that. It sounds like someone was being clever and maybe in some way that is justifiable and interesting, but not having seen the sort of discourse that's emerged around it, I have no idea. Is only one Sandos. I guess I'm saying that right, asks, Semiagog, isn't the starting point agreement on foundational principles? I think so, unless that was a way for you to catch me contradicting myself, in which case I definitely disagree. I'm not sure specifically what you're asking about because it was back further in the conversation. Okay. Anas Al-Mansour says, Semiagog, do you speak Turkish? Biraz. Azıcık. Yani. Bu aralar konuşmuyorum. Sadly, I've forgotten most of it. But I can sing you a little Turkish lullaby. Mini mini bir kuş dönmüştü, pencereme konmuştu. I'm not speaking it much with my friends, yes, and I'm doing a translation. I'm translating some things from Turkish, but it's Ottoman Turkish and it's slow, so it's not really helping me stay up to speed. If I got back in among Turks again within a week or two, I would be back up to my sort of 80% conversational fluency. Okay. Maalesef. Econogate asks, Semiagog, why did liberalism fail? I mean that from the French Revolution forward to today's poop storm of degeneracy. Well, I think one of the pieces certainly is the issue of the division that made the liberalism possible in the first place. I think the standing army and the parallel tracks of civil and martial government, the one waiting behind the scenes, I think that is what in itself, or in large part, made it possible for this kind of liberal society that we've held up as an ideal to exist. And I think to a certain extent, as you lose sight of the fact that these two things are connected, as they seem to spin outwards towards the periphery of the circle, going back to that metaphor of the dog pinned to the ground, it seems as though they're two separate things when in fact we're dealing with a unity, because our martial and civil tracks come together to form this sort of foundational government that is ours. And so false dichotomies and the ensuing false dialectic, laziness, inertia, ineptitude, the general stupidity of the majority of people. It's just an attitude, and a snotty attitude I still can't shake. I try, and I've broadened my sense of how important people who may not be the smartest are, because they make the fucking whole machine work. That's another problem. Yeah, but primarily subversion and the fact that we no longer teach any tradition. There's a point at which progress outpaces the institutional continuity necessary to have any memory of our culture. And so the worship of progress, the extension of adolescence, basically the subversion and exploitation of neoteny, which is the extension of childish characteristics for longer and longer periods of time in the growth of an organism, all of that plays a role in all of this. So there's a few to get you started. Wait a minute, I thought I just caught up with something Prism was asking, and now I got to go back because it did this damned... There he is, Prism. Semiagog, have you read Colin Woodward's American Nations? The 13 nations that settled America seem to have been in constant tension so that there isn't a single American ideal. Well, yeah, that would be the idea of states, and states being effectively about as large as you would want them to be for the people to have a sense of shared identity within them, and the focus on the federal system and the gradual sort of emasculation of state power would seem to have some role that it has played in all the fucked up things that have happened over time to our various experiments. But I haven't, I'm not really knowledgeable enough about the whole federal versus state rights history and trajectory, but it's definitely a part of the story. Okay, this is Adherent of Lady of Columbia. Semiagog, my questioning assimilation was that we are always talking about deporting illegals and changing laws, but we have legal citizens that will be culturally non-American but can't be deported. Yes, they can't be deported as yet, but some of you may have heard that there is discussion now of getting more detailed about race or ethnic background in the upcoming census. So, for example, you're no longer, it would seem, or at least this is being threatened, that you will no longer just mark black, but you will mark whether or not you are, for example, a black African or a black African American. And once you start to get more granular in that way, I don't know, it would just signal to me that it's at least possible that that could be a step on the way to, for example, living in a country that might be a little more open-minded about deportation, because we'll have a clearer view of what's happening, where it's happening, and to some extent how it is happening. Philosophicat says, wait, what? I heard my name? You're a good moderator. You didn't even pay attention to what I was saying. I was promoting your channel. All right. What else do we have here? Cassie says, thanks for the plug, mate. Indeed, thank you for producing content for free that I get to enjoy, that I otherwise wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to follow what's going on in Italy. I wouldn't be able to follow what's going on in Austria or in Ireland. What else here? Scrolling down. Mark Andreotis says, Semiagog, overall is the costume, or those who work on the world of tomorrow instead of jogging pants, because sport is working on doing nothing. I would love to answer. I wish I could, but I can't quite understand what you're asking. Okay, next one. It looks like it was an autocorrect issue. Although I suppose it's a English not as first language issue. I can never be sure because people are typing in things from all across the world. Julie Coles says, could leftists be persuaded that every country should have a majority culture rather than no dominant culture because corporations can control us easier when there is no solidarity? I suppose that's an argument that could be made. There's just so much knee-jerk emotional tension that's been coded in for so long. There was that I have to wonder how much success you'd have with it. It might be a line of approach. I don't know. I'd have to think about it more. But I saw a clip on Twitter, and it showed some sort of I don't know, some municipality, some meeting or something. With a bunch of people who showed up from the community and they're listening to somebody speak. It was just a short clip, so I can't say where it was from, but it's this Mexican guy who's just, talking all this shit about how the U.S. is a problem. And can you imagine how shocking, how terrible it was that this Mexican came here as an immigrant and was treated so badly? It's absolutely intolerable. And this white dude sitting in the audience just kind of leaning back in the chair, and he's like, so go back to Mexico. And instantly you just heard this, oh, like across the room. And it was exactly like in elementary school when a kid did something and all the children went, oh. It was so knee-jerk. It's so deeply seated. And so I guess what I wanted to illustrate with that is that for a certain portion of the population, reason, rational arguments, none of it has anything to do with it. So, you know, you got issues. White Healing says, Semigog, what semiotics or etymology books do you recommend? For semiotics in general, it covers so much because it's basically about, semiotics is the study of meaning. And so it applies in so many different areas. You know, it could be anything from heraldry to numismatics to cattle brand registries and how those get used to maintain livestock. It could be, you know, how whether or not a given group of signs that are used by railroad companies tend on the average to result in fewer or more accidents, you know, by marking a crossing in one way versus another. It can have to do with linguistics. It can have to do with dress, with gesture, with dance. So it's a vast subject. And the problem is that a great deal of the information that is out there on the subject of semiotics has been dominated by people who come out of the field of linguistics. You had sort of two major traditions of it, explicitly called semiotics or semiology, and in fact that's the distinction. The ones that call it semiotics generally are, it's more an American kind of thing. It comes out of Peirce's ideas, and he came out of like math and logic, and proposed this thing called a semiotic based on triads. And with the continental tradition in Europe, you have Saussure, who came out with his course on general linguistics. He suggested that over and above and beyond, sort of an umbrella over the study of linguistics, would be another discipline, which would be called semiology, that would be concerned with all sorts of meaning and communication. But the problem is that the people who are into spoken language in particular, and to a limited extent those who are into written language, you know, more your Umberto Eco types or your Italo Calvinos, they how shall I say this simply? Linguistics, which is supposed to be a part of semiotics, and we're supposed to recognize that there are all these other domains of communication and modes, methods, modalities, forms, whatever you want to call it. It's the linguists, the linguisticians, as a part of the whole leftist takeover of the institutions, that dominate everything. And they've even gone so far as to propose that the fundamental way in which humans communicate is spoken language, from which we derive written language and all these other things, and that, you know, you have to understand it there. Like Roland Barthes posited a translinguistics. So they've actually got everything ass side up. They've got it all fucked up, and it's done on purpose to be able to maintain the ambiguity that is an inherent aspect of how communication happens with language, because it's arbitrary. The relationship, to take a Saussurian term, between the signifier and the signified is always arbitrary. And so they want to extend that arbitrariness to every way that we communicate. Well, this isn't arbitrary. If I do this in a threatening manner, that's not arbitrary. You can read it. It has meaning that is not up for question. You know, even when it's, you know, had its balls somewhat cut away in order to make it a conventional gesture of rebellion, it still echoes the threat of a blow from an incoming adversary. You know, so what I'm trying to get at is that as soon as you get to the level of looking at semiotics in particular, or excuse me, in general as a discipline, it's fucked up and dominated by people who have their heads up their own asses. And so it's hard for me to recommend an approach to semiotics unless you go originally to Saussure, or originally to, what's his name, Peirce, and move forward from there. But even then, you're missing a lot of the stuff, because there's a whole background of human history where people have looked quite penetratingly and intelligently into how we use signification. That's the history of it. It's a mess. If you want to get into semiotics, you're going to have to get into the whole subject, far beyond what you would expect. But I mean, with that said, maybe you can go out and get a book on semiotics for dummies and get something out of it. I think there's a general introduction to the subject by Civic, who I think, as I recall, is a Hungarian guy into semiotics. All right. King Salmonfish asks, Semiagog, or says, they were claiming Mayor Dick Ass was using black people as props. This is the blackface thing. He rounded up a few black people there and put them behind him in the podium. It's basically blackface. Or tokenism is what they like to call it. At this point, I just don't care anymore. No offense to you, certainly, but the subject is just... Then Mark Andre Otis says, Semiagog white people did not have culture because they don't live in the past. I don't agree with that. I think they live in the past, or tend to a considerable extent, maybe less so than other peoples, but that doesn't mean that aspect of our connection to our history and our ancestors is entirely shallow. Okay, what's this? Now I'm lost again because it reset, damn it. Ugh. Good God. Here we are. We're back to white people don't have a history. And then Econogate says, yes, we have tended to rely on technology to solve those degenerations from first principles of liberalism as an extension to compensate for our losses in meaning synthetic substitutes. Thank you for that observation. Mountain Patrolman asks, Semiagog, have you seen Eric Prince's keynote on the damage done by the 17th Amendment? I have not. While I'm right here, Eric Prince, 17th Amendment, and I've got that up for later. So I won't forget. Thank you. I will check it out. Milos Ivanit says, Semiagog, hello from Germany. I made it for live. Awesome. Thank you for checking it out. Happy to see you here. Next, Mark Andreotis says, don't worry, it's just a joke about your sporty pants. I didn't think I was going to have to get up to put a cat out, and I was going to be comfortable. Next time I'll wear some tight Jordache for you. Or maybe Chick. Or maybe Sergio Valente. Or some Panador parachute pants. Okay. Adherent of Lady Columbia, the divide between the English liberalism and the French Revolution liberalism stems from the French taking up Kantian and later Hegelian rationalism. Kant modernized Plato's Republic. Nothing on the face of it sounds crazy. I would just point this out, that the famous, Burke, who seemed to be such a right-wing firebrand against all the excesses of the French Revolution, was himself quite liberal, was way over on the liberal, quote-unquote, progressive side of things for the time, which goes to show you that what was thought of as liberalism in the past was very different from how we construe it today. Next question, let's see. Prism. Semiagog, I can't necessarily vouch for all of their ideas, but Orthodox Christians seem well versed in handling false dichotomies and semiotics. Have you gathered useful ideas from them? Never on the level of dealing with them as people who are Orthodox Christians. I have noted that Eastern Europe, for all that everybody likes to talk about, Eastern and Central Europe, for all that people like to pretend that they're somehow really backward, they tend to be very sophisticated, and there's great scholarship that comes out of there. That's not all Orthodox. I imagine Christians in Hungary are probably Catholic, but there's, what's his name? Imre Grafik has done some great stuff on folklore and semiotics. I don't know, it may have something to do with how they approach the text. Because there's this idea of religion of the book. People always want to talk about Abrahamism and how it goes back to some fundamentally Jewish thing, and I think it has much more to do with the text, the canonical text, which extends from Judaism and Islam up into Christianity, or Judaism and Christianity up into Islam, more precisely. So there may be a way in which they handle their textual traditions, and I don't know enough about that. I've looked at mnemonics and the art of memory and books things like the arrival of chapter sections and headings and tables of content and indices and these other innovations that followed on the heels of the big burst of Thomas of Aquinas and the rest, and the idea of logic and the reintroduction of Aristotle. But I have not looked, for example, at how mnemonic elements were incorporated in books from the Orthodox world. Did they use rubrics with little illuminations that were used to seat the first letter of the text sequence in the memory? By showing, if it's a psalm, you have the first letter of the psalm, but the little illumination with the big letter in it done in red, hence rubric, would have figures from what's going on as described in the psalm wrapped around the letter, so you remember the letter and you see the image, and that reminds you of the text, and then you draw it forth from your memory. Like, I would have to look at book culture and the art of memory in the Orthodox world to see whether or not they had some sort of inbuilt culture that or group of traditions that tended to make them less susceptible to that kind of manipulation, and I haven't done that work. Whoa, what did I miss here? Oh, Fiend J says, Semiagog, please spell out names when mentioning authors. Oh fuck, you're gonna make me spell Shebok. Okay, Peirce, it's Charles Sanders Peirce, I think it's E-I-R. Yes, Charles, C-H-A-R-L-E-S, Sanders, S-A-N-D-E-R-S, Pierce, pronounced Peirce, but it's written like you would typically imagine Pierce, P-E-I-R-C-E. And then you have Saussure, and that's what, Ferdinand? That's F-E-R-D-I-N-A-N-D, D-E, Saussure, S-A-U-S-S-U-R-E. And then I think it was Thomas, isn't it? Yes, Thomas Shebok, I think is how you pronounce it, but I can't. You try to ask me how Magyar is pronounced, I have no idea. That's Thomas, as you would typically see it spelled, T-H-O-M-A-S, followed by the surname Shebok, which is S, just S, E-B-E-O-K, Thomas Shebok. If there are any others I've missed, let me know. And I will do what I can to spell them for you. Andrew says, Semiagog, have you ever been yelled at by leftists over your opinions in real life? That would be funny because I find you approach topics in a very reasonable manner. I think I had a leftist freak out on me over the telephone about some things. But, yeah, and maybe a few times in real life, but they don't, I leave because I don't like Yankee cuss fights. They're degrading. They degrade those who indulge in them and who watch them. If there's a reason for violence, then it's justifiable because you're in fear of, serious injury or death to yourself or someone in your presence, in which case break whatever is in front of you. And anything short of that, to simply stand around and have a dog bark at me. There's an old Turkish saying, they say, if a dog barks at you, do you bark back? It's a dog. So yeah, I don't generally fight. I go away. And if it's something where there's real serious pressure, I have just an inbuilt thing that I've always had. It's innate. I was born with it. I've got a congenital stone face. So my face just locks down and I show no emotion. So I generally don't get worked up. Or if I do get worked up, I'm not going to let anyone else ever see it. Okay, King Salmon Fish. Semiagog, I'm not offended. I just found it interesting they would go against racial diversity. Their ideology is basically whatever suits them. Yes, indeed, sir. It is. Okay. I don't know what's going on in the background here. I am skipping ahead to these that, as I've mentioned before, ladies and gentlemen, if you want me to respond to a question, you're going to have to highlight it. And I think I'm going to roll out of here at 11:45, which will make a clean 2 hours for this clip. So if you have questions, bring them forward. We still have, just over a half hour left. Not King David, living word of God, Semiagog, meaning plays an important role if it is ever fleeting from us, just saying. Well, you are certainly welcome to say, sir. King Salmonfish says, Semiagog, what do you think about the idea of mimetic pandemics? I guess that just means, I mean, it's mimetics. Mimetic pandemics could basically be subtitled with that classic work. What is it? Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Yeah, it seems like a new way to refer to something that we've been aware of for quite some time. Fiend J says, Semiagog, do you have any videos in the Ezo series in the pipeline? Any other interesting projects? You know, I've been wanting to do something on the Ezo series for quite some time. I just, I don't know how many people are into that. If you are, please let me know. Chime in and let me know, because it'll motivate me to produce that content. I probably have a few things, but I get inspired to do them and then I set them to one side because there's something more immediate that's coming. So I want to, but it remains for me to come up with the right thing to find it interesting and for me to feel that I have something to say. As far as any other interesting projects, I think I'm going to do one. I did one on material culture on the Kinjal or Karma, the Circassian dagger, the dagger from the Caucasus. I think I'm going to follow up and do another one on material culture, and that one will be on Caucasian or Circassian saddles from the region of the Caucasus, because they're fascinating and they're gorgeous, and I have photos of a private collection that no one else has ever seen. I've got 2 of my own. I've got photos that I've taken on collecting runs, in places like the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul that I took when I couldn't buy the saddle, but I got some pictures of it. They're just, they're awesome. Absolutely awesome. So I'm probably going to do that. And I have in the Mark Studies series, which is a playlist on the channel where I get into the academic stuff on Marx that relate to my publications on it in the past. There's one that's missing it's a presentation that I gave at Leiden University in the Netherlands. And it was the first presentation I ever gave. And it was the only time I got a real, bang up, roaring applause type approval for my presentation. The next year I went back and I think I hurt somebody's little feeling. But the first year it was a great presentation. People really liked it, and it's basic information. Part of it is covered in the other clips in the Marx Studies playlist. But I've got the original presentation and I have all the little notes in the PowerPoint for the slides. So I'm thinking what I will do is basically redo that presentation for YouTube and post it. So yeah, maybe one on material culture, on Circassian saddles and horse culture. Differences with their stirrups, the number of straps they use, the fact that they use a cushion, the fact that they're on the balls of their feet and they tie the stirrups up high to have bent legs, so you're in a better position to do all sorts of acrobatics that they call jiggy in the saddle. Yeah, and probably something on Marx studies, and perhaps a bit more with poetry. And then there's one other one I'm working on, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Yes. So, Nick Face says yes for SO. I'm glad to hear it. Palooka82 says, Semiagog, do you think there is any positive result from dictatorial systems such as communist regimes retaining cultural values, ethnicity, etc.? Can Western philosophy survive itself without replacement? And it's kind of a couple of questions. Communist regimes that retain cultural values and ethnicities, it sounds like National Socialism, which in my view is always a process. It's never an end state or goal. It's always just another stepping stone on the way to uniting all under heaven, because of the nature of the religious instinct, unrecognized as such except by those who exploit it, that serves as the driving force behind what we call communism. As for can Western philosophy survive itself without replacement, Western people can survive, and within them their philosophy, but nothing exists outside of each of us individually. That's why people talk about information, and I'm like, if it doesn't exist within a person, then it doesn't exist at all. It's worm food in a book, bookworms come through. I see a little cheers icon from Faith Alexandria Oglesby. Cheers. Adherent of Lady of Columbia says, Semigog, perfect gun channel for you. Forgotten Weapons. Oh yeah, I watch that all the time. All the time. And actually, I've had a few guns that I collected, but I got rid of them. I had a, from Dagestan, I had a late 19th century Miquelette lock pistol covered in silver with silver Kofgari on the barrel. What else did I had? Certainly had. And one other one. Oh, I had a North African, probably Algerian Miquelette lock rifle that was like 7.5 feet long. It was late 18th century, so late 1700s. It would be like, you know, the kind of musket that would be carried by, hopefully I didn't say rifle because it's definitely smoothbore, that would be carried by, you know, Barbary pirates and the rest, North Africans, Ottomans in North Africa. It was gorgeous. I mean, it looked great on a wall because it's 7 feet long and the barrel had all kinds of silver Kofgari, I think, on the barrel, but maybe some actual true inlay. Can't remember. Yeah, so I watch Forgotten Weapons. I'm not really that interested in his stuff for much older guns, but that guy knows quite a bit about modern weapons. I mean, well, shit, from the European, from the mid 19th century with European weapons onwards, and it's fun to watch. Philosophicat says, Semigog, what is your take on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in regards to everything that has been happening in the world in the past month? You know, I have not been paying attention to it. I primarily look at things with the stars as a mirror in which I can reach understandings within myself or about myself. The whole, you know, judicial astrology and applying it to events out there in the world. While I don't dismiss it out of hand, that's sort of the least interesting part of it to me. After all, we were warned by Dante himself that those who wish to see the future will end up in a circle of hell with their necks twisted around, walking backwards but looking forwards, or walking forwards but looking backwards. It all has to do with that same image of prudence that I've discussed in the past. Okay, 34534. Semigog, are you aware of Claire Haw and her ideas of secular Quranism? She claims the solution for the death of the West is using the Quran like a legalistic document to reinvigorate traditionalism. I'm going to hold off on making any remark about that idea because my first inclination is to laugh out loud. But I shouldn't do that because I don't really understand the context, and maybe there's some value in the notion. It does not seem interesting to me at the outset, though, you know, on the surface of it, just from what I've heard. But I'll have a look. Luis Gonzalez says, Semigog, what is worse, being enemies with Israel or mainland China? Each has different implications, you know. Were we to be open enemies of either group, you'd have different things that you'd have to deal with. I don't know, because the Chinese have learned quite a bit about the whole sort of, you know, postmodern long march through the institutions, subversion, dialectical manipulation game. And they have so much of it that's inherent. I mean, they're the ones talking about the doctrine of rectification of names. They're the ones who have Sun Tzu as one of their primary thinkers. You know, so some aspect of Chinese thought, when crossbred with post-religious utopian ideology, can be pretty fucking virulent, to steal an expression from the left. So I don't know. The two of them together would be hell, you know, on wheels. Okay, White Healing says, Semigog, I love the Ezo series. Thank you, sir, or ma'am. I'm not sure which, but thank you regardless. 34534 says, Semigog, do you have a lot of experience with Mormons? They have the highest birth rate, are often preppers, are the most conservative majority religious denomination, and have pride in their history. I only knew one guy who had to live among Mormons. He grew up in Utah and then escaped to the West Coast, and we were roommates for a while in Oakland and San Francisco. He's a good guy, not a Mormon, but he had lived among them. And I did drag race on my motorcycle one night, a couple of Mormons. They didn't strike me as very bright because one of them had a Ninja 600 and the other one had like I want to say a CBR 400 or 450 or something. And because they had all the fairings and all the racing graphics and everything else, they were both convinced that they would beat me in a quarter-mile straight line because I had this bike that looked all old, but it was an XS 1100. I mean, it's just an 1100cc motorcycle, and they were all like, "We'll beat you, man. Let's race." And I said, "Okay, let's race, but we have to bet." And yeah, the guy in the 600 could he wound it out further. He could redline higher in RPMs. So you'd see as we were shifting, we'd get closer together, but I beat both of them and took their money. So I wasn't impressed with Mormons in that respect. But I'm aware of their white horse prophecy. I'm aware that they're conservative. I'm aware that they're all over the intelligence and services and law enforcement. And I did know a Mormon chick in my high school who was quite nice, and her family was quite nice. So I'm inclined to be very open-minded about them. I don't know how I feel about like magic underwear and stuff, but not to belittle or dismiss them. The general picture of the modern Mormon, I don't know if I'd want to live in Utah, though it's gorgeous, but I'll keep an open mind about them, and I think they're probably, I'd rather have them on my side than not. Mounted Patrolman says SO videos are my favorite. Wow, okay, all right. I'll get off my ass and get around to it. Mark Andreota says, Semiagog, how long the 100 generations European men's will work to keep the system running despite the lack of respect from their governments and even from their wives and ex-wives? All that times they are a-changing. I think all that is fitting to change. Luis Gonzalez says, Semiagog, common law or civil law? I'm not sure what that means. Okay, Nick Face. Semiagog, taken any interest in societal pathological narcissism? Symptoms seem ubiquitous for both the winners and losers of the pathological narcissism. I poked around in that area, as most of you will remember who followed the channel for a long time. I was looking at the personality disorders and the DSM, whatever number it's up to, and dependent personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and all the rest. I haven't really looked at it much since, but if you want to see that sort of thing, I mean, you've probably seen it, you've been around for a long time, you can go back into the old content. I think the last of the ones where I played with those ideas was with social justice makes people sick, based on the whole idea that, if you have as little as 3.5% of the population is sufficient to bring about a revolution, and that they show a higher rate of success when those are nonviolent. So my hypothesis that I explored there was that you could make people sick intentionally in order to foment revolution. And in the DSM, whatever, with these personality disorders, some of them they explicitly acknowledge can be brought about through what they call social learning, which means you can make people sick. So yeah, our higher institutions and everything else seem to be designed to make people sick in order to get them up to the level of the population necessary to have a revolution, but based on their illness, but not based on their desire to see some other world come into existence. Okay, Not King David says he's got to go. Catch you on the rewind, but thanks. Yes, indeed. Thanks for checking it out. Zed Dez says, Semiagog, wear the hat one more time. I sent a message to you on Twitter, Zed, about how to shrink that hat back down because my big light bulb head has now stretched it out. And I think the fact that I have a bun up here on the back that presses against it when I stretch it down over my head. So you had mentioned that there is some way to shrink it a little, not a lot. And so I wrote to you to ask how to do that, and you did not answer me. So the fault, milady, is not mine. Zed says, can you imagine being as phenotypically unique as Semiagog? Just be a mutt who doesn't go out in the sun. Although there is a weird thing, most of the places I've been to, everyone's like, you could be from here, but you don't look like you are. So I'd be in Spain, and they're like, you could pass for Spanish, but you don't look Spanish. In Turkey, they're like, you could pass for a Turk, maybe you're half Turkish. There are even people have said, yeah, you could be a Schwabian, just be a mutt. And you got it covered. Be from every part of Europe almost. And yeah, there you have it. Andrew says, Semiagog, there are a lot of rising traditionalist youth movements that appear to hinge on ironic detachment, memes, etc. regarding their beliefs. Does this hold them back rather than bolster them? That's a whole safety thing. It's the whole, like, you know, when you see like a teenage couple and they pretend to hate each other, but they're really interested. It's that whole thing of like not risking, half doing it. It's essentially an adolescent defense mechanism, and it's appropriate to adolescence. So you're never going to remove it, ever. So don't even bother trying. That's just how they're going to approach things. You'll simply have to develop a certain amount of ability to still talk and approach things the same way with them when you communicate with them, at least as groups, without having to seem like, hey, my cool kids, what's up? My skateboard's over here, y'all hanging? You know, they'll look at you like, what rock did you fucking crawl out from under? But yeah, to deal with that, you just have to be more ironic and more abusive and more clever. And the smartest of them will be able to follow it. The rest of them will just be fucking teenagers. Okay, Mounted Patrolman Semiagog, I hope you have the modern day Minuteman's musket. I guess you're talking about like an AR-15 or something? And no, I don't. I don't. I may get like a quote-unquote black rifle here at some point, but they're just, I don't know. If I do, it'll probably be something 5.56, and I'll get something light. But as it stands, an M1 carbine, you know, you can't reach out as far or whatever, but it's even lighter. I mean, you play hell getting an AR-15 to be as light as an M1 carbine. You can carry plenty of ammunition out to 100, 150 yards. It's good medicine. I mean, why bother? And I inherited one from my dad, so there it is. I have little bolt, you know, tools and new magazines and replaced springs and a whole spring replacement kit if I have problems and a sling for it, so it works, you know. Okay, Philosophicat, Semiagog, in that case, what is your view on esoteric astrology a la Alice Bailey? More your style. You know, I haven't looked at Alice Bailey in a while. Isn't she one of the... I always get her confused with what's her name. Oh, what's her name? The White Goddess or whatever. Annie Besant? Annie Besant and Alice Bailey. And then there's another one. What's her name? Theosophical Society and stuff. I get all those fuckers confused. When it comes to esoteric astrology, I have a project that I'm working on that is a visual horoscope that doesn't require interpretation. Instead, it deals with sound and color, dissonance and harmony, in a non-arbitrary way. But I do not yet have the funding that I will need to explore that idea and launch a version of it. Perhaps after this year. I think this coming year is going to be me figuring out how to move out into the woods and to make money primarily from intellectual property as well as doing things remotely online. I'm going to be writing some, releasing some existing books and writing some other ones. So yeah, I think I'm going to go on Bride Quest 2020. Then I'm going off to the woods. And then I will probably work on this whole visual horoscope idea because I've had it for like almost 20 years now, and the idea is just badass. People aren't even going to know what hit them. The only issue is that I need a really high resolution monitor. Okay. Big, very big and very high resolution monitors. Okay, Joseph Stalin, Semiagog, modern art is absent of any beauty. Why is there no longing for it anymore? I think the longing is still there for it. It's just, you know, we've been forced to eat other people's vomit for so long that we're not used to it. I mean, it goes this whole thing that's currently, you know, buzzing about with Trump saying that architecture needs to change to be beautiful instead of these big looming brutalist mountains of ugly brick, you know, designed to make you feel repulsed and oppressed simultaneously. We're going to be seeing a lot of that come back. And I'm hoping, I have a friend whose father is a very famous painter who runs a successful gallery operation and has been involved with contemporary art for his whole life, and is quite an accomplished gallerist. And he's not right-wing at all. But I'm hoping, because he's a really close, dear old friend, to get him on to discuss the issue of the right wing and art, because I think there's some work that can be done there. So yeah, that's part of an answer. This is Vash the Stampede. Semiagog, do you think China created the coronavirus in revolt against Trump's trade war to bring down America because we depend on their products? At this point, I can't say, man. I mean, and there's so many like games within games that can be played. So, for example, I'm not saying this is the case at all, but for example, China could have stolen the virus and brought it to Wuhan to work on it, and Christians in Action or somebody could have found out that they'd done so and decided to release a similar version of it in the area so that it would seem like it was China's fault. And then China, in turn, could take versions that mutate slightly and introduce them in other places around the world. I mean, it's so complex that this simple idea of who did it, first off, it's not over. Second of all, I mean, there are plans within plans, so to speak. So it's exceedingly difficult to try to get any sense of what is actually going on there. Oh, Philosophic Cat says those videos are my favorite too. Well, thank you. Then I really do need to do more of that. I just have to give it some thought. I'll probably have to go back through my old journals from when I was much more a magic boy. And I don't know, the whole issue there is I gotta look at my history and how I used to think, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, is that me? Oof. Mark Andre Otis says, thanks, Semiagog, you did it great. It's why we stay with you. Well, thank you very much. Fiend J says, Semiagog, if it makes you feel better, you couldn't pass for a Norwegian. No, indeed. No, indeed, I couldn't. That's why I had a Norwegian girlfriend once upon a time. Kjersti. I was like, how the hell does KJ spell Kjersti? Kjersti. God. And she would say, strange. They were all fucking strange, man. Scandinavian women were strange. I watched her punch this Turkish dude once in the street. That was funny. She just belted the dude, knocked him flat on his ass. She apparently was a farm girl who went into the tourist and hospitality industry, and I met her abroad. A girlfriend from Iceland for a little while, too. I guess they found me exotic and different. Yes, I could not be Icelandic, no doubt, or excuse me, Norwegian, no doubt about it. Yeah, so there are limits. Yeah. 34534 says Semiagog, Amish, Mennonites, and Mormons are the only majority white denominations with large growth. The share of the white population that is Mormon will increase generation to generation from 3 to 4% to 5 to 6%. Yeah, just bear in mind that as soon as women decide it's time to railroad, it's like Tim's old joke, man. If women decided one day that men had to paint purple circles on their asses if they wanted to get laid, within a week, every male would have a fucking purple circle on their ass. That's why this whole thing of the patriarchy and how women are dominated just annoys the fuck out of me. The cultural power of women is fucking enormous. It's another one that is a great encapsulation, again, that I got from Tim, which is that women are wiping your ass when you come into the world, and they're wiping your ass when you're going out of the world. They see it all because of their longer lifespan, and because of their longer lifespan, they form often the connecting chain. They're the ones who survive long enough to actually be great-grandparents, and then they'll be dandling the kid on their knee that is their great-grandchild, and so they form a link successively across generations. They're also the ones who have the children when they're youngest, which goes back to the Jesuit thing of, give me the first 6 or 7 years of a child's life and you can have the rest. They're the ones that tell stories. They're the ones who embody and transmit the stories of the people. And so, you could say, yeah, there'll be more Mormons, there'll be more whatever. As soon as women decide how they want it to be, believe me, it's going to be that way. To a considerable extent, they have, how shall I say this? They have much, much more power than we mouth or they pretend. And it suits them perfectly for us to continue imagining that they're powerless, and it suits them perfectly to complain and whine and say that they are powerless, when in fact, they have their domain of life, and if they don't like the way any group of people are behaving, they can raise the next generation that will replace them. And when women as a group begin to have, what was that, mimetic herd response or something that was said earlier, the idea of it flashing and pouring through the extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds, when the wave of reaction to all of this and rejection of it really rolls through women, they're perfectly capable of enacting their program and policing behavior within their groups. They're fucking merciless, man. they are absolutely without mercy once they decide a thing needs to be a certain way. So, yeah, I think we're going to see the return of quite a bit of that. Adherent of Lady Columbia says, at Semigog, should we try to recreate a folkish movement, but not undergoing contamination by subversive elements? I don't know. We should each not hide our light beneath a bushel basket. We should each speak our minds, and we should each seek to do that thing that we alone can do, which is not to say there aren't important things that should be done in cooperation as well, but there are, by definition, certain things that if you don't do them, they simply will never happen, because you are this unique instantiation of isness here in the world of manifestation, and you have never come before and will never come again, even if you accept a model of reincarnation, because there is no such thing as, repetition in that respect. It always distorts and modulates and modifies slightly with each successive iteration or manifestation or, karmic cycle or whatever you want to call it. So there are things that only you alone can do, or that you alone can do, and if you don't do them, they'll never be done. So in addition to cooperating as well, I think we should make our voices heard. We should let our talents shine, or we should invest those talents rather than burying them in the ground or giving them away, to take another a biblical parable. We should do that, and that is going to be the secret, rather than artificially trying to recreate something. Our past will always be a part of our present and future, but I don't think we can resurrect it. I think we can reinterpret it and move forward. It's not a straight line upwards, nor is it a circle that's a perfect cycle like a Spenglerian thing. It is in fact a spiral, which means you'll come back around, but you'll be a level further up the system. Philosophicat says, I have a bride in mind for you. I hope her knuckles don't drag the floor. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you. I think, pending finding out just who that is. Econogate says, laugh out loud, purple circles on their ass, thanks for the Semigog. Yes, indeed. King Salmonfish says, Semigog, apparently Scandinavian women generally reach puberty much later than most, thus the pronounced jawline, also obviously something women. Okay. I don't know, I found them odd. I didn't know about Scandinavians at that point. And yeah, what did I learn when dating Scandinavian women? What was it that really stood out? I'm going to have to give that some thought. I'm not going to open my mouth halfway, because I don't want to speak ill of people I used to be with, nor consider things properly. But it wasn't anything that I had expected. It wasn't anything that I had expected at all. I have to give that some more thought. And the streets of Sweden, I think that was strange. I've been to Sweden, Stockholm, and it was, again, not what I expected. It's like the women should all be carrying riding crops at their belt, and these sullen little men pushing prams like 6 feet behind the women who are walking carrying shopping bags. Strange. Okay, Fiend J, Semigog, I'm going long on cattle car stocks, should pay dividends, give my greetings to Tim. I will do so. I'm so sorry that all the prognostications about cattle cars didn't come to pass as quickly as he had thought, and at times I had agreed with him. I continue to believe, however, that there's only a certain amount of time that this can continue. All right. We have 7 or so minutes left. Luis Gonzalez says, Semigog, opinions on Roman Catholicism and East Orthodoxy. No, because I don't know enough about East Orthodoxy to render an opinion. I don't know enough about it, though I have been looking at whether or not the priesthood of a given religion is allowed to marry, and whether or not they're encouraged to have children, because I think there's some secrets behind that. So I think I've gotten a basic understanding of how things work in most of the, at least Sunni denominations of Islam, or let's say Sunni sects of Islam, or whatever. And I think I have some understanding of how it works in the Catholic Church, obviously, with them not being allowed to have wives and children. With Orthodox, I believe that they can be a priest if they're married, but generally they have to be married first before they become a priest, and then afterwards it's really discouraged. But I don't fully understand how different Jewish groups handle the rabbi. I mean, it appears that they're going to be married and have children, of course, since rabbi means somebody who's got a beard because they're married. But I think something about whether or not the culture is sterile and moribund can be extracted from considerations of their approach to whether or not the priesthood can have children. But it's also, you know, you've got the aspect of nepotism, or the idea of passing on that power over generations. And apparently the Western Church didn't want to allow that to happen. So they, you know, obviously they don't want things to pass in bloodlines because they lose institutional control. Anyway, I've looked at that a little bit, but I don't know enough about the Orthodox churches to offer any opinion. John Gora says clickety-clack. That'd be great, man. Just a clickety-clack video. That would be cool. In the style of Ghost Tank, but actually clickety-clack. But done in some way where it's fucking funny as well as gory. It has to be at least twice as funny as it is gory. But I'm going to continue to meditate upon ways in which John Goris's unique style can be applied. And of course, John Goris is free to tell me to fuck off because it's his style and it works just fine like it is. Nevertheless, there's something about the mood of his animation that I think is an as yet unidentified major opportunity. Okay, so we have 4 minutes left, ladies and gentlemen. 4 minutes left. What questions do we have remaining? John Plum says, get an AR pistol short barrel. Nope. I want plenty of barrel length for that power to be burned properly. So I get the velocity that I need. Luis Gonzalez says, Semigog opinions on Jared Taylor and E. Michael Jones. I look forward to seeing it. E. Michael Jones is completely unimpressive to me. Jared Taylor, I think, is a reasonable man who thinks before he opens his mouth, thinks at great length, and has done so for years. And he seems to be actually interested in success rather than creating a little intellectual ghetto for himself. So I tend to like Jared Taylor. But we'll just have to wait to see. That's a Scanza Forum thing, as I recall. We'll just have to wait to see, and I'll check it out. All right. Water Penny says, just enough time for a closing poem. Maybe. Let me see what I have here for poems, if I can pull some up. Oh, I see Radical Greek is in the house. I'm assuming Radical Greek is the same as Radical Greek Beard. Maybe I have a poem here. Let me see. I'm going to pull this up in the background. King Salmonfish says, Semigog, what do about porn analytics showing most people want young white women? There's not nearly enough white chicks. Also, redheads are the best. I'm not going to weigh in on the redheads thing. I have nothing against them. I've dated redheads. As for, you know, people having a right to young white women, even if there are some few people who believe that they do have a right to access to young white women, all of that's going to turn around rather rapidly when young white women themselves decide that they're no longer willing to tolerate as much of that. Anonymous user has an interesting statement here about JBP's analysis of the right as people interested in boundaries, thinks it's bound up tightly with the feeling of disgust. How can you provoke disgust without tragedy? That question is a little too long for the time remaining, as is the one about opinions on analytic philosophy. So, let me see if there's a version here. There's a PDF of my book that I've been sending around to people to check the poems before I publish it. It's almost ready too. I'm just trying to pick out a good poem that seems to fit. 34534 says, I think Claire Kaw would like to interview you. She is an agnostic that sees Christianity as kaput in Western Europe and that Europeans need to co-opt their future Islamization. I've never heard of her. If she wants to interview me, all she has to do is reach out to me. She can do so by emailing semiagog@protonmail.com. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I want to find a good one. I'd like to find one that I haven't read before. It's getting harder because I keep doing it, which means that there are fewer and fewer left that I have not gone into. Almost there. Surely there is a good final closing poem. Why'd you have to do this to me, Walter Penny? Dag nabbit. Maybe that one. I'll go back. We'll see in a second. No. I've done that one too. Fuck. I've read them all. I've read them all! Shit! No. Almost there, ladies. Almost there. I've already done that one. I might be running out of poems. I'll have to write some new ones. I have a few of them. 2 that I've been working on, actually. Okay, yeah. There's one for us. I can do this one. Assuming that I can... Oh, fuck off. Am I going to be able to read this? Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. We're almost to the end. Yeah, alright, we'll read this one. If I can get this damn thing to increase in size. Let me open it with preview. That will fix it. I'll make it larger, and you will have a poem for closing. Look at this. I've already gone 1 minute over the time limit. I want it to be nice, clean 2 hours. Okay. So let me just look at the last little bit of questions here. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, happy Saturday night to everyone. Last one. Moonman, Semiagog, did you know that you look like a skinny version of The Witcher? Yeah. I've heard that before. Mark Andreatis says, thanks, Semiagog. Thank you, sir. Philosophic Cat says, can you please open all 3 doors and show us what is behind them? I live in a split level house. One door, the one that is, over here. The first that is closest to the foreground goes upstairs into my kitchen, which is a different floor, and my living room's on that floor too. The next one in line goes down into a basement floor, and the one directly back behind me goes to a laundry room, a hallway, a bathroom, and a bedroom. So no, they're not all closets. It's 60s, so the doors are a little bit narrower. You fucking insane people. Okay. They're not all closets. Philosophic Cat says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love my white cat? That would be a 1. No offense, but male cats are fucking stupid. The only cats I'm interested in for myself, if I were going to have one, I would have females because they're just smarter. The last cats I had 1 male and 1 female, and the male was just an idiot. And the female was actually very cool. Alright. Semigog, worst left-wing YouTuber, or God knows. Prism says, excellent as always, Semigog. Thanks. Folded money to Semigog from Bash the Stampede. Thanks for doing the Tim version. For those who do wish to support the channel, you may do so through GoFundMe or Subscribestar. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All the credit and none of the blame for those who do. Okay. Philosophic Cat says, you actually have to open them and show us so that we know you don't have skeletons behind them. And no, I don't. No, Miss Lady, I don't. So, we are at the closing here. I'm going to read you this last poem. And here, let me get this over where I can be facing forward into the screen. All right. And then we're going to end this stream. And I wish you all well. It's a perfect time for me to cut out because it looks like Philosophic Cat is threatening that she's going to have her cat pee on my floor. So this is a perfect time for me to run. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, so much for joining me this evening for this live stream. There will be more. I'm planning to talk with Mr. Tim about a couple of interesting subjects next week. We had been waiting for new topics to come up because so much has been covered already, and now it seems that a few new things have happened. So we'll actually have something to talk about, which we didn't this last week. So again, thank you all. And here is the closing poem. I wish you all a lovely Saturday night. This one is entitled Desire for Desire. Elbrus, Meru, Sinai, Kaf, or simply the mall. There's always already your ascent. The dimension vertical where gravity tightens, gut strings plucked, with a lullaby fascination so intimate, what you think you are is scarcely privy to it. You've only ever been climbing one mountain. Beware the false summit that spawns the ineluctable question, where do you go from here? Have you ever broken your teeth on the stone apple of your heart's desire? Would all the rest seem dry and empty, echoing like the hole in your face where your mouth was, until that white-hot, gasping and dizzy instant you realized she changed the locks in her eyes? Would then the realization strikes you like a new-wakened child, still half night-blind, sparkling with fleeting dew, blinking resentment at the sun's hot malevolence? Only one desire remains.